My name is Lana Duncan, and today for my midterm project, I am going to be discussing the documentary Kiss the Ground. So to start off, Kiss the Ground is a 2020 documentary narrated by Woody Harrelson. It explores the idea of soil health restoration and regenerative agriculture as a potential solution for climate change. So some of the central themes and concepts it goes over are healthy soil, carbon sequestration, and soil in regenerative agriculture. So for the next part of the presentation, I'm just going to be going over those central themes and concepts, explaining what they are and how they're able to interact with each other. So first off, what is healthy soil? Healthy soil is soil that is alive, unlike dirt that you might find in like a parking lot where you pick it up and it's all dusty. Healthy soil is usually moist. It has life in it. It has microbes, fungi, organisms. It has big worms and it has little bugs in it. When you pick it up, it moves because it is alive. And the purpose of healthy soil is to cycle nutrients, be able to retain water, and be able to grow plants. So it sort of serves as its own little ecosystem that recycles resources within itself and is able to support life. So what is carbon sequestration? Carbon sequestration is basically the process of taking carbon dioxide from the air and taking the carbon and storing it within a sink or just basically some type of like place to store something. So the documentary mainly goes over soil sequestration, soil carbon sequestration, but soil is not the only place that you're able to store carbon. You can also store carbon in the ocean. You can store carbon in like, a forest. But the main thing that was going on, because we're talking about agriculture, is taking carbon and storing it within healthy soil. So carbon is the most common greenhouse gas, which is why we want to think about options that we have to pull it out of the air and out of the atmosphere and put it into something that both benefits us and also lessens the amount of carbon that is being released. When you store carbon in the soil, it is typically stored for years, but it can be stored for up to decades. So in this little diagram, we have an example of how this process actually occurs, because this isn't a process that is forced like by man. This is a naturally occurring process. So when we have a plant and the plant absorbs CO2 from the air, which it happens through photosynthesis, this is a normal thing that plants do just to live. They take that carbon and they pull it into their system, and it goes to the rest of their body to help it grow. Some of the CO2 ends up being released back into the air. It doesn't take all of it. It doesn't store all of the CO2, but some of that carbon is pulled down into the roots. And when things in the organisms, or things in the soil, because soil is alive and full of organisms, when they get to the dead leaves and the roots and stuff that the carbon was in, they store that carbon in the soil. That is the cycle of carbon sequestration, specifically pertaining to soil. Now, so we know how healthy soil and carbon sequestration work together, but what is regenerative agriculture, and how does that have anything to do with the past two concepts that we've gone over? Well, regenerative agriculture is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is agriculture that it has the purpose or the goal of regenerating itself. It's able to regenerate its resource rather than depleting it. So when you have traditional or conventional farming, that you're usually thinking of big like tractor type machinery going through and it's tilling the land and it's digging up all the dirt and it's planting the same crop over and over and over. That process, while it is very efficient for getting a lot of the same type of crop, and a lot of places have a lot of demand for the same type of thing, it depletes the soil. It depletes the soil health. It erodes the top soil layer. And we learned in class that soil has multiple different layers and they have different like processes that they go through. And the professor talked about an example of when she raked all the leaves off of her top of her soil, and it led to the water not being able to be held in the soil and things were eroding, and we had excess water in some areas. That is what is happening with conventional farming. You're destroying the top layer of soil because of how you're farming it, and you're leading to erosion. Not only that, when you're conventionally farming, you're using pesticides and fungicides and chemicals that may work to prevent things from getting into your crops, but are not necessarily healthy for the environment, and they're not necessarily staying on the farm. They're getting eroded, and the water is sweeping it all away, and it's polluting other areas. So instead of the water being retained in one area, the soil has become so unhealthy that the water can't even stay there. So what is regenerative agriculture? It is agriculture that serves to lessen, get rid of some of these problems through alternate methods of farming. We're talking about composting, cover crops, and not tilling the ground, or tilling as the least amount that you can to prevent that erosion of the healthy soil. And when you do this, like I said, with the process of carbon sequestration, this is a cycle that essentially supports itself. So you use regenerative agriculture, you use processes that serve to benefit the environment that it's in, that serve to benefit the farm that you're working on, and that farm, the soil and the crops, they sort of heal themselves and they benefit themselves, and it's kind of a growing, strengthening type of farming rather than the prior type of farming we were using, which is destructive and tends to degrade and lessen its health over time. This is something that's strengthening itself over time. So I'm going to be going over a case study. We're going to be talking about Gabe Brown's farm in North Dakota. Gabe Brown is a farmer that has been farming for a long time, decades, and he transitioned from conventional to regenerative farming because of the cons that were coming with conventional farming that I was talking about. Because of the degradation that was happening to his farm, it was no longer sustainable. So he started transitioning. How can I have a farm that is more beneficial to me and is I'm more able to support and maintain? So he started utilizing no-till planting, composting, cover crops, and rotational grazing, letting his cows, which you can see, graze on the material. And he was finding benefits for his farm, not only with the health of his farm, but also better yield from his farm, both in the planting and also the carbon storing within his farm. He found that the organic value, the organic matter within his soil, increased from around 1.9%, 2% to a little over 6%. Now, I know these are small percentages, but 2% to 6% is 3 times increase. He found that his water infiltration increased from 0.5 inches per hour to 8 inches per hour. That's like 16 times. That is a large amount of water retention. Now, I don't live in North Dakota, but we have lots of farms in California, and a drought is a huge thing that California has to deal with often. We have a problem with it being very dry and a problem with fires. The amount of water retention that he's keeping in his farm is an insane increase. And not only that, the soil carbon retention in his ground, so how much carbon is being maintained in the ground due to carbon sequestration, was 96 tons per acre in the top 48 inches of the ground, where typically that amount is 10 to 30 tons. 96 tons was how much was being retained in comparison to the typical 10 to 30 tons. So he's seeing a massive increase of water retention, massive increase of organic value in the soils. The soil is much healthier, and massive increase of carbon in the soil, meaning that he's having a stronger, more beneficial farm, not only for himself, but also for the environment. It doesn't have to be such a big sacrifice to convert to regenerative farming. It doesn't have to be a sacrifice of how much you're able to produce and how healthy your farm is going to be. So I'm just going to get into a little bit of my analysis and reflection of the film. The film did a really good job of showing why regenerative farming is a good thing, why it is able to benefit against carbon in the environment, and showing examples of, oh, well, we were using normal farming and we switched to regenerative farming, and this is how it helped. This is how the process of photosynthesis impacts carbon sequestration, and this is why we want carbon out of the environment. And it did a good job of that. But I think the issue that I was having with the presentation, or the documentary, was it seemed to simplify climate change as there's carbon in the air, how do we get the carbon out, put it in the soil, why haven't we been using this? When I think that climate change is a much more complex issue, and if the solution was this simple, I don't think that it would be still a problem. And what I mean by that is, I think that they're saying this is the answer. They even have it. This is the picture for the movie. They have the solution is right under our feet. It's not the solution. It is a solution, and not a overcompassing, gonna fix everything solution. It is sort of a piece of a greater puzzle, and it is something that is important to acknowledge and to have to see the greater picture. But it is not the end all be all solution, especially because this documentary focused a lot on farming because it's talking about regenerative agriculture. But agriculture is not the sole problem for climate change. It is a large part of what is happening with the greenhouse emissions and the carbon being introduced in the air because tilling releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the air. But it is not the end all be all. And so moving on to that, it didn't really acknowledge big corporations and their how much they contribute to fossil fuel emissions, to emissions into the air. It was really just mainly talking about farming. And I think that while we can use carbon sequestration and we can take the carbon that is in the air and pull it down into the soil and store it there, it's not going to prevent the issue about how much carbon we are pushing out into the air through burning of fossil fuels, through driving, through planes flying around, through the extreme supply and demand of like how much we're purchasing from companies and how much companies use and how much they use for the benefit of the company with deforestation. It's not solving those problems. How much emissions does Amazon put off for all the packages that get delivered in one day to people all over the US? It doesn't acknowledge things like that. It's mainly focusing on farming. And I think that it's a good first step, but I think that it would be naive to say that this is the end all be all solution. Guys, the solution's been right here. Why aren't we looking at this? So that's one issue I had with it. Another issue I had with it is it's talking about, and even talking about Gabe, it's talking about well, this farming's way better than normal farming, so why don't you just do this? Why are you all doing conventional farming? But it's not really acknowledging the price and the difficulty that comes with that kind of transition. It's great that it worked out for Gabe, but not all farmers are making a large amount of money. For some farmers, you would have to flip your whole routine upside down and restart everything that you know, and that costs a lot of money and a lot of time, and it makes you liable to issues and to like change is hard. So somebody might not be able to afford to change their whole routine, to change everything they know, to get rid of everything that they spent their money on and spent their time on, to transition to something that's healthier. They didn't talk about that transition so much and benefits for farmers or how they can go about that transition. They just said you should. Well, how do I do that? Change isn't that easy. If it was, then I would, but they didn't really talk about that. Additionally, this movie had a lot of really big names. Woody Harrelson was the narrator, but it had a lot of big actors and big stars in it. You're seeing Tom Brady, his ex-wife, but at the time wife, who was like a famous model. You're seeing Ian Somerhalder, who's like another actor. Lots of actors, lots of really big names, and that's neat, I guess. But it doesn't really provide like it doesn't really provide like faith in the science part of this for me. It just seems like we're more advocating and not really showing scientific evidence. I feel more like I'm being sold something rather than I'm being educated on something. And I think a big part of change for better is education. I really don't feel like I need Tom Brady and his wife to tell me that I need to eat a salad because it's good for the environment. I would rather a soil scientist tell me the benefits of this type of farming and how I would be able to convert to that type of farming, and people fiscally tell me how that is going to be possible, rather than a bunch of rich people who are telling me how I should be treating my body, how I should be treating the environment. It's very easy for a person who has a lot of money to convert to things that are better for the environment than someone who doesn't have a lot of money. It's the same thing you see with people saying that, oh, well, you need to eat healthier, you shouldn't eat fast food, you should engage in like healthier activities. But for people who don't have enough money, healthier activities and healthier food might not be an option because it just might not be in your price range. So I think that it would have made more sense to reach for less fortunate demographics than pushing for really famous people to be in the documentary. But yeah, so what can we do? We can support farmers that use regenerative practices. I live in Sacramento, and there are farmers markets every Saturday, so you can go and buy stuff from local farmers. You can join a local community garden. This is a local community garden in Sacramento, but I personally don't go to this one. I go to the Brooks Truett community garden, and I plant my own vegetables there. I grow my own tomatoes and my own tomatillos and my own herbs, and they utilize composting. They utilize like all organic there, so you can participate in that type of thing yourself. You can, if you don't have access to a community garden, you can practice composting at home. That is possible. You can take your food scraps and have your own miniature compost bin and compost yourself, and that lessens the amount that's going out into landfills. And if you can't do any of that, you can always just educate yourself and educate those around you about stuff like this, because education goes a long way for letting people make educated choices about what they're choosing to buy, what they're choosing to eat, and the choices they're choosing to do when it involves getting rid of things in the environment. So yeah, thank you.